Hello, everyone. I am back with episode 2 of The Quiet Gardener with Rose, and I am Rose. So, for those of you who are returning for the second episode, thank you. Really appreciate it. I appreciate your patronage. And for those of you who are just tuning in for the first time, this is only episode 2. So here we talk about mostly things that have to do with society and relationships and morals and behavior. And it really is a podcast that's geared towards imparting wisdom to women in particular, but that doesn't mean men can't glean something here. But imparting wisdom specifically to younger generations. And so today on episode 2, I have an article that I found online. And it was an interesting title, and that's why it caught my attention. So this article is published by the New Yorker, which from perusing the website, it's a very left-leaning publication. I don't follow them. I don't really follow any kind of magazines, news sources, any of that stuff that's online or any of the popular channels. But this is from the New Yorker, and it was just published June 23rd of 2025. And the title is Are Young People Having Enough Sex? Question mark. So that is the title of today's podcast. Are young people having enough sex? Now, the premise there is that they should be having sex at all. We're going to go with the title. And then the subtitle on this article says, confronted with a Vegas buffet of carnality, Generation Z appears to be losing its appetite. Dun, dun. So I don't know who this lady is who wrote this. Her name is Gia something, Tolentino. And I assume she is a writer for this magazine. She's a staff writer for the New Yorker. She's won some awards and published some books, or at least one book. So yeah, interesting. But this article, I perused it. I only read it through once because that was more than enough. And let me tell you, one thing I will say about this article is I didn't really understand the writer's intent. She started with this title, which led me to believe she was here to argue that young people should be having much more sex than they are, and that this is some kind of crisis that they're not. And then she goes on to talk about conservative people and articles and books they've written talking about how people shouldn't be having sex and implying that that's bad. How young people shouldn't be having sex and unmarried people shouldn't be having sex, implying that that's bad. But she never really gives any, that I can see, any strong foundation to support her, I guess, beliefs that young people should be having sex. So I will quote you her a couple of things that she said here that stood out to me. So about halfway through the article, which this is like a 10-page article that just talks about what other people wrote. It doesn't really talk about what she's written or her research or studies or her position. But she does say, and this is a quote from the article. I have been with my partner for 16 years and we have children together. I agree with another author that she complains about, that there are goods other than freedom, that desire does not automatically validate one's sexual choices, and that committed partnerships are socially and sexually important. So, the one firm quote she gives says that she's all for committed partnerships, and I'm assuming that would mean monogamous relationships, but yet this article seems to be about something else. Then at the end, there's another couple of quotes and points that she makes that seem crazy to me, but I'll let you decide. She says the reality that relationships are based on the idiosyncratic magic and complexity of any particular pairing and must be continually navigated and negotiated across time is arguably learned in the purest way through sex. Who knew? It's the way you're supposed to learn how to negotiate relationships in life. And then she says it can be a form of discovery, especially, but not only for young people, a zone in which we might, if we're lucky, learn how to be partners and friends and citizens, how to find ourselves and one another worthy of love and respect simply for being people with desires. Sex often leads us to a greater understanding of what we want in life, etc., etc. So, from her final stance at the end of this article, it sounds like she's saying that we become better people if we have more indiscriminate sex, especially at a young age. We become better human beings. So the crux of this article is that Gen Z, which according to her is the generation that's currently in their teens and 20s, very young people, that Gen Z is having less sex than the millennials, which I guess was the generation before them. I can't keep track of all of this. All these letters and groups. But apparently, they're having less sex. They've become more conservative and, according to her, more prudish in their pursuits of just indiscriminate physical pleasure. And she's questioned, and then she calls them Zoomers. I don't know if that's what they call themselves, but she identifies this Gen Z as Zoomers. So the Zoomers apparently are more like the Boomers in terms of they are not having sex and indiscriminately. They're not having multiple partners. She said all these, she cites these different studies that say that high percentages have not even had sex in the last year and aren't pursuing sex. And then she goes on about how a lot of that is due to porn and sex being so accessible and BDSM. She brings that into it. I don't even know how that fits. She's just like throwing all these random sexual topics into this article. But she's saying all of these things have just kind of, I guess, burnt out the senses of young people. And so, therefore, they're just not pursuing it at all. Now, so I will get my take on this. And again, I come from a certain perspective. I am a conservative. And when I say conservative, I'm not talking about politics at all. When I say conservative, I'm talking about my views, values, how I act in the world, and compared to the majority of Western society, I would be considered a conservative, as in careful, prudent, cautious, that kind of conservative. So I would be considered a conservative Christian. Yes, I am Catholic. So, in terms of sex, I will say that my belief, and I am, not conflicted about this belief at all. And most people, secular people, will probably disagree. But my belief is that you should not be having sex with anyone you're not married to. Period. End of story. So, obviously, there's a lot of biblical base for that. Sex is, to me, something to be shared with your spouse. It has a purpose, and that purpose is to confirm and deepen the bond that you've committed to before God and everybody else. And the other reason would be for procreation, if you are, open to having children or you're of an age where you can still have children. But really, I don't think people should be having sex outside of marriage. Now, I know most people will say, even so called Christians, oh, that's too old fashioned and blah, 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 blah. You can say what you want. But the reality is, the Bible is old fashioned. It's over 2,000 years old, so it's very old school and it doesn't change. The Bible isn't going to change its doctrine or the meaning of the scripture just because times have changed and people are more loose and more free and more willing to do whatever. Okay? So that's the bottom line. Now, that being said, I am not saying that I was a virgin until I got married. Okay? As I've said in the last episode, I have done it all. been there, seeing that. I did not come to Christianity until adulthood. I wasn't raised in a church. I mean, I was raised as kind of a non-denominational Christian, meaning we believed in God and went to church on some Easters and Christmases. But I wasn't really raised with a faith background. So that's something I came to as an adult. So let me tell you, the way I was raised, which was primarily by female relatives. I did not have parents. That's a whole nother story. We don't need to go on here. But I wasn't raised by my parents. I did not have parents. I was raised by my grandmother and host of aunts. Um, and really the attitude there outside of my grandmother, who was very traditional. I mean, she was born in 1927 in the South. So she was very traditional. So she did instill some of those traditional values within me, but the society around me at large, not only my other relatives, but also the community that I lived in, did not preach anything traditional. Actually, it preached more of a feminist, women's lib kind of rhetoric in terms of as a woman. I should establish myself with my own career and my own money and my own resources. And you didn't really worry about marriage until you got a little bit older and you're just supposed to be free and do whatever suited your fancy, whatever you needed to do. And sex was actually viewed for, I mean, there were still obviously segments of society that, even within my environment, that were still had some conservative views, right? But overall, the attitude was, as a woman, you should be free to do whatever. You should be experimenting with sex, and as long as you were having safe sex, whatever that means, that you should be out there doing whatever you felt like it, and that it some kind of way, as this lady has stated, would make you a better person. Um, what I would encourage anybody to think about, particularly young people, um, is, and being honest with yourself. Really think about, if you look over your sexual history, and if you're sexually active, I'm not talking about virgins, obviously you wouldn't have a sexual history. But if you're sexually active, please identify how being sexually active, how having various partners or multiple partners over your lifespan so far has made you a better human being. How has that enriched your life? How has that created a greater well-being, substantial person within you, within yourself? And I can tell you, in spite of the fact that I experimented with sex when I was young, I mean, I started having sex, I won't say what age, but I was an adult. I was a legal adult. So in my community, my peer group, I was still kind of a prude because they were having sex at 15, 14. Like they were at it pretty early. And so I did wait until I was of age, but I will tell you, as I look over my history and the partners I've had, not that I've been out there like that. I mean, I haven't been a hoe, but I've had experiences. I am 53. I cannot say that any of those experiences enriched my life. None of them made me a better human being, a better person, a more well-rounded, well-developed person. It didn't do that at all. Actually, probably it did the opposite. It created more damage. It created more baggage. It created more questions. It created more doubts. Um, so outside of physical pleasure and gratification, and maybe teaching you a few tricks, I'm not sure what benefit there truly is to having sex at a young age or as an unmarried person. I mean, at the end of the day, people will give this argument that, well, if you start young and you have some experiences under your belt, you'll better know what you want and need from your partner or your spouse. I'm going to say your spouse. Um, and to me, that's nonsense. That's utter rubbish. Because, first of all, when you commit to marriage, you have a spouse, you figure those things out together. So you don't need to have 10, 15 years of out there in them streets to be able to work with your partner to figure out what you both want and need and what will be satisfying to you both. I will guarantee you, I don't care how many people you've slept with, how many people your guy, your husband has slept with, that does not equal that person is going to know exactly how to please you and how to satisfy you because everybody likes things a little bit different. Right. Everybody has their own turn ons, turns off. Everybody likes things in a certain way. They like to be touched in a certain way. They like a certain amount of foreplay. And it doesn't matter how many prior partners you have. You're not going to know that about the person that you are in that relationship with until the time comes for you to be intimate. And so honestly, I don't see a purpose or a benefit to having sex outside of marriage. I just don't. And I'm shocked and pleased with the fact here that young people don't either. The youngest generations. So one of the things they try to talk about in this article also is that, a part of this is because young people are so filled with anxiety and depression that they're just not even looking for relationships or any kind of connection with other people. And that may be a part of it, but the bottom line is connection and relationship and bonding does not have to include sex. So I'm not understanding why that's being equated with closeness and intimacy because to me closeness and intimacy is something very different than the act of intercourse. You can have intercourse with a stranger. I mean, there's a whole industry around, right? You can have hookups, there's hookup dating sites, and that doesn't bring emotional fulfillment. And even young people have figured that out because they're not doing it anymore. They figured out that, that just doesn't do it. Even if I have these partners, I'm still feeling a sense of emptiness and a void and a lack of connectedness to other people. So, how about this? How about we focus on connectedness with other folks through relation, not necessarily getting naked with that person and doing the deed, but how about we just develop friendships? Like, how about we just spend time together? How about we just have meaningful conversations about stuff that matters? And how about we try to show empathy for our fellow man and really take an interest in getting to know him or her? That's a thought. So, in terms of this, are young people having enough sex? I don't think young people need to be having any sex outside of the context of marriage with their intended, their spouse. And I'm glad to see that there's been a little bit of a shift. Now, people can argue over why the shift has happened. There are many factors that go into it, but the bottom line is something is happening in our society where people are understanding that immediate gratification, physical gratification, doesn't do it. It's not enough. It does not, at the end of the day, give your life a sense of meaning and give you a sense of belonging and purpose. And so, friends, this is good news. This is things the tide is shifting. So I'm very happy to hear about this. So let me know what your thoughts are about this topic. I know, as I said, a lot of people will say, "Oh, that's a very old-fashioned, prudish position," but I don't care. It is, in my opinion, the right way to go, the way to go that's going to lead you to ultimately fulfilling unions. And when you do, partner up, get married, whatever the case may be, and decide that then you want to engage in a sexual relationship, there's nothing wrong with that. It's not, us Christians aren't out there saying sex is horrible, it's bad. It's fantastic, especially in the appropriate context. I mean, even beyond procreation, like I said, sex is made for man. I mean, Christ created us to be all that we are, and that includes having sexual desires, right? Those desires are there to deepen the bond between a husband and wife. not just to get your kicks, or to get your rocks off. It's not there for just some immediate fleeting sense of satisfaction. It's there to bond people together, to bond a couple together in this union that is supposed to last a lifetime. So that is all I have to say about that one today. I will, if this app allows me, that I'm using to put notes, show notes, or whatever the case may be, I will put the title, source of this article in there, so you can look at it if you want to do that. But that is all I have to say for today. I've hit my 20-minute mark, so that is all. Until next time, bye bye.